There's a method that costs less than $3, and it can drop the temperature of a room by several degrees without using a single watt of electricity. Not a weak breeze, not a temporary effect. A measurable, repeatable cooling method that has been used for centuries in some of the hottest places on Earth, and almost nobody talks about it anymore. You've probably felt heat trapped inside a room before. Thick, unmoving air, walls radiating warmth long after the sun goes down. Now imagine walking into that same room and feeling a subtle but undeniable coolness, like stepping into shade after standing under direct sunlight. That's exactly what this method does, and it doesn't rely on modern machines. It relies on something much older, something simpler. To understand this, you have to go back thousands of years to ancient Persia, around 500 BCE, where engineers built massive desert cities in places where summer temperatures regularly exceeded 45 degrees. In cities like Yazd, they constructed towering structures called windcatchers, tall, hollow towers designed to capture even the slightest breeze and funnel it downward into living spaces. But the real secret wasn't just airflow, it was what happened next. At the base of these towers, air would pass over water, sometimes stored in underground chambers, sometimes trickling through porous clay surfaces. As the hot air moved across the water, something subtle but powerful happened. The water began to evaporate, and in doing so, it pulled heat out of the air. Not metaphorically, literally. The temperature dropped, rooms cooled, entire homes became livable in conditions that should have been unbearable. This wasn't isolated knowledge. Around the same time in ancient Egypt along the Nile, people hung wet reeds and cloth across doorways and windows. As the dry desert air passed through these damp barriers, it cooled before entering the home. Simple materials, no machinery. But the effect was real. Travelers wrote about stepping into Egyptian homes and feeling an immediate drop in temperature even during peak summer heat. Move forward to medieval India during the Mughal Empire in the 16th century, and you'll find another version of the same idea. Large woven screens called kus mats were soaked in water and placed in windows. As hot winds passed through them, the air cooled dramatically before reaching the interior. Entire palaces used this system, not as a backup, as the primary cooling method. Even in southern Spain, during the Islamic Golden Age, architects used narrow courtyards with fountains and shaded walls to create natural cooling zones. Water, airflow, and evaporation working together in quiet harmony. No compressors, no refrigerants, just physics. And here's where it gets interesting. These systems weren't based on guesswork. They were based on a principle that modern science would later formalize and measure with precision. Evaporative cooling. When water evaporates, it requires energy. It pulls that energy, heat, from the surrounding air. The faster the evaporation, the greater the cooling effect. In the early 20th century, researchers at institutions like the University of California began studying this phenomenon in controlled environments. By the 1930s, evaporative coolers, sometimes called swamp coolers, were already being used in parts of the United States, particularly in dry regions like Arizona and New Mexico. Studies showed temperature drops of 5 to 15 degrees Celsius under the right conditions. Think about that for a second. Up to 15 degrees, using water and airflow. And yet, despite being cheap, effective, and scientifically validated, this method slowly faded from everyday use in most modern homes. Air conditioning units took over, electricity replaced airflow, and something that once cooled entire civilizations quietly disappeared from common knowledge. But here's the part most people never ask. If a method works, if it's cheap, if it's been proven across centuries and cultures, why did it vanish? Because at some point, someone looked at a $3 solution and realized it couldn't compete with a system that charges you every single month. And that's when the industry started paying attention. If these kinds of forgotten stories matter to you, subscribe and ring the bell, because this is how knowledge like this survives, quietly, one person at a time. Now think about the modern cooling industry for a moment. The global air conditioning market alone is worth over $150 billion annually, and that number keeps growing every year. Maintenance, electricity consumption, refrigerant replacement, unit upgrades, it's not a one-time purchase. It's a system designed around continuous spending. Now place a $3 method next to that. A method that uses water, airflow, and basic materials. No monthly bill, no complex installation, no proprietary parts. They don't coexist, because they can't. This isn't about dramatic conspiracies. It's about economics. Quiet, predictable, measurable economics. When a cheap, effective solution exists, it gets pushed to the margins. Not through force, but through design. It gets rebranded, simplified, or ignored entirely. Look closely at modern, evaporative air coolers, sold in stores today. Many of them use the exact same principle discovered thousands of years ago. Water evaporation, airflow, heat exchange. But instead of costing a few dollars, they're packaged into plastic units and sold for $50, $100, sometimes $300. Same principle, different price. Even worse, these systems are often marketed as secondary solutions. Not as effective as real air conditioning, they'll say. But what they don't explain is that effectiveness depends heavily on environment. In dry climates, evaporative cooling can outperform traditional AC in terms of energy efficiency and cost. Dramatically. So why isn't that emphasized? Because the real money isn't in efficiency, it's in dependency. Think about every room you've ever cooled using electricity, the installation, the wiring, the monthly bills, the repairs, the eventual replacement. Now imagine if even a portion of that demand disappeared because people started using low-cost, passive cooling methods again. That's billions in lost revenue. Let that sink in. And here's the science they rarely explain clearly. Evaporative cooling works because water molecules require energy to transition from liquid to vapor. That energy is pulled from the surrounding air in the form of heat. As heat is removed, the air temperature drops. It's the same reason your skin feels cool when sweat evaporates. Your body is literally using this ancient cooling system every single day. But here's the key detail. The drier the air, the more effective this process becomes. In low humidity environments, evaporation happens faster. More heat is absorbed. Greater cooling occurs. This isn't theory, it's measurable. In controlled tests conducted by the US Department of Energy, evaporative cooling systems have shown efficiency rates up to 75% lower energy consumption compared to traditional air conditioning. That's not a small difference. That's a fundamental shift in how cooling can work. Think about every hot day you've endured, every fan blowing warm air around the room, every moment where the heat felt trapped, heavy, inescapable. Now imagine using a system that doesn't fight the heat with brute force, but quietly removes it from the air itself. If you've watched this far, you already understand more about cooling than most people ever will. Subscribe and share this, because information like this doesn't spread through advertising. It spreads through people who recognize its value. And now comes the part most videos skip: how to actually use this method yourself. Here's exactly what to do. And it's almost insultingly simple. Start with materials you can find almost anywhere. A basic cloth or towel, a shallow container of water, and a source of airflow, a window, a fan, or even natural wind. Total cost? Around $2 to $3 if you don't already have these at home. First, soak the cloth in water until it's fully saturated but not dripping excessively. You're aiming for a consistency similar to a damp sponge, wet enough to hold water, but not so soaked that it drips everywhere. Next, position the cloth where air can pass through it. This is the critical step. Hang it in front of an open window or place it in front of a fan. As air moves through the damp fabric, evaporation begins immediately. Heat is pulled from the air, and the air that continues into your room is cooler, noticeably cooler. Within minutes, you'll feel the difference. Not a blast of cold air like an AC unit, something subtler, a shift in the atmosphere. The kind of coolness that feels natural, not forced. For better results, increase the surface area. Use a larger cloth, or multiple layers. The more water exposed to moving air, the greater the cooling effect. If the cloth dries out, simply re-wet it. The process resets instantly. You can also enhance this method by placing a shallow tray of water beneath the cloth. As droplets fall or moisture accumulates, evaporation continues from both the fabric and the surface below. Double the evaporation, double the effect. In small rooms, this method can reduce perceived temperature by several degrees within 10 to 20 minutes. In dry climates, the effect is even stronger. A mechanic in rural Arizona tested a similar setup inside a metal workshop during peak summer heat. Outside temperature, 42 degrees Celsius. Inside, by using nothing more than wet burlap and a fan, the working area dropped to around 34 degrees within half an hour. Not perfect, but enough to turn an unbearable space into a usable one. And the reason it works is simple. Evaporation removes heat, every single time. No exceptions, no branding required. Roman engineers understood this. Persian builders perfected it. Egyptian households relied on it. Indian craftsmen scaled it. They all knew. Roman legionnaires knew it. Persian architects knew it. Egyptian builders knew it. Mughal engineers knew it. And at some point, you stopped hearing about it. Not because it stopped working, but because something more profitable replaced it. A $150 billion industry depends on you never questioning how cooling actually works. Depends on you never realizing that a large part of the solution was already discovered thousands of years ago. This knowledge was never lost. It was simply priced out of your awareness. Because here's the truth. Physics doesn't care about marketing. Evaporation doesn't care about branding. And nature has never charged a monthly fee. Every share of this video brings that knowledge back into the open. Every subscription keeps this channel digging deeper into methods like this. Methods that were buried, simplified, or quietly replaced. The next vault opens soon, and what's inside might completely change how you think about heat, water, and survival itself.